I provide you with a decent life through this profession.
People exaggerate, and I don't blame them. 500, not 300 riyals.
No worries at all. No children or kids to worry about. In fact, I wonder, do we really have cheap labor? When countries find labor gets expensive, they invent other methods like using machinery. So you find that, for example, in a country like America, building a house there can be cheaper than building a house in the...
I mean, our economy is 30 times smaller than America's, yet we're the second highest country after them in remittances.
And in terms of remittances, this is documented the World Bank and almost every food industry, especially food processing. You could say that the Netherlands has been way ahead of the rest of the world.
Why does society view certain professions as inferior?
I always use the policy of attraction. What does the policy of attraction mean? Put a reward at the end of the road for people, and you'll find that they head toward it.
Welcome, Mr. Saleh. We're very pleased to have you with us on the Business Podcast. Welcome.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope, God willing, that this will be an enjoyable and light conversation.
MashaAllah, you're from the Eastern Province, right?
Yes, that's right. I was born and have lived in the Eastern Province almost all my life. But recently, due to work circumstances and so on, I moved to work in Bahrain. Honestly, it's been a long time, about 25 years, mashallah.
All right, before we get started, can you give us a brief introduction about Saleh the businessman, Saleh Al-Shari?
Just a little bit. It's important to start by talking about my upbringing. In the beginning, my father, may God forgive and have mercy on him and on all our parents, was from the founding generation at Saudi Aramco. MashaAllah, yes. As a young man, he moved from our village, which is one of the suburbs of the well-known southern city of Al-Namas. And at first, he joined the army, which was in Taif. Then he heard about a company in the Eastern Province. And this was around the 1940s or 1950s. I think it was the late 1940s. At that time, there were many young Saudis, we call them, those who moved to the Eastern Province. So the Eastern Province truly represented a unique case, especially in the city where I grew up, which is Ras Tanura. As Ras Tanura was considered, at least at the time I was born, which was the 70s. It had the largest oil refinery in the world. And for me, as I mentioned to you, it represented the beautiful example of ideal development, which accompanied the great renaissance the country experienced after the discovery of oil and so on, because you would find people from all walks of life. People, that is, citizens from all regions, and they were all employees, all living in the same neighborhood, all doing the same jobs, or rather performing different jobs. So, for example, you would find that many of them worked as welders. Some of them worked in pipe welding, others in mechanical jobs, or even in construction and building. But at the same time, they were proud of this and never saw it as something to be ashamed of at all. And of course, we should also undoubtedly mention that the credit goes to Aramco, because it played a major role in creating what we might call a gradual change that it absorbed. Let's say it took in the simple backgrounds of many people, educated them and trained them. And when we saw people then, for example, if we talk about someone, Ali Al-Naimi, he is one of that generation, and there are many others him. The executive leaders in the country and so on, of course. So it was a wonderful era, especially for me, since I was born and raised there. Starting out in Ras Tanura gave me, as you might say, this beautiful and truly unique image, one that rarely gets repeated, honestly.
It's clear that it had a big impact on you.
Honestly, yes, because I saw that well. I don't want to exaggerate, but in my view, it really serves as an exceptionally good and truly inspiring model for how you can actually bring about a genuinely radical and significant change in a certain community without, so to speak, in any way affecting or undermining the core cultural and social foundations.
The constants, the fundamentals, and so on.
So it was quite an experience. After that, we moved to Dahran because of my father's job. Dahran is the company's main headquarters, and being there, you could say, really broadened one's horizons. Now, we were in an area where not everyone worked for Aramco. So you would see government employees and teachers. You'd see merchants. And after that, this played a major role in shaping, let's say, my way of thinking and the fields I became interested in. Of course, at that time, and unfortunately, this is still somewhat true, that if you are outstanding, smart, or talented, you have to become either a doctor or an engineer.
Yes, that's right.
And unfortunately, I really disagree with that, God willing. I mean, I'll get to that point about how this idea can actually have very negative effects. So I initially went into that field, but I always found myself more drawn to the social aspects. I even loved literature and poetry, not as a poet, but as an appreciator. I really loved writing, and I was always, thank God, receiving compliments from many teachers and so on. But I was convinced that this thing means Syrian. In colloquial terms, doesn't put food on the table. So unfortunately, this saying can be, and here we come to a very important point, which is how to build social awareness. We used to have, let me call it, this is one aspect of it. You might find, for example, or you find yourself in a certain thing, but you choose not to practice it because there is an idea that it is really you. And this might actually be true. So at this point, you could say a phase of my life began where I ignored. I joined Aramco and was sent on a scholarship to the United States.
So after high school, you went to Aramco.
Yes, I went to Aramco, thank God.
You studied at university?
Yes, Aramco has a scholarship program. They select outstanding students, and thank God I passed all the requirements. They also have a 1-year preparatory institute before the scholarship. Thank God I passed that as well. And at that time, their policy was not to send students abroad except for rare specialization. Honestly, because of my curiosity and my love for learning about different cultures and so on, I wanted to travel. I wanted to, because almost all the generations before us had studied abroad on scholarships. So I even chose a specific major just so I could be sent abroad, even though I remember the department head asked me why I picked such a rare major, saying, your grades are good. You could go for chemical engineering at the Petroleum University. I told him, no, I want it because it's rare. But honestly, I just wanted to get sent abroad. So it was an experience. Try it after, when you look at a lot of different experiences.
What was the major?
It was honestly a strange major. At first, they told me it was marine engineering, but it turned out later that it was actually hydrographic survey. This is actually an important job that Aramco needs for the pipelines under the sea. They need marine surveyors who use sonar devices, which send out sound waves to make sure that the seabed is strong enough so that these pipelines don't break or leak or anything that. So it was, a job, really important job, actually. Even the work itself goes on for 2 weeks, and then you get wait. But did I have any inclination toward it or any desire? I can say that I was one of those. For the most part, I wasn't really sure about my interests at that time, even though if you asked me, I'd tell you I enjoyed certain things. And that's a very important point. When you talk now with the new generation, how do they make decisions about this? God willing, we'll get to that. So later on, this was all happening during the time of the first Gulf crisis. I remember when I arrived in America, it was 10 days after the Iraqi army entered Kuwait. So at that time, things were tense and so on. And then I was in America, seeing the situation there. And when you come face to face with the reality, you find yourself thinking, okay, now I've come to America, I've seen America and so on. But is this really what I want to do in my life? I realized that, no, this isn't the right field for me. So I tried to change direction and so on. But still, I was determined to study something related to engineering, for example. I returned from America, enrolled at the University of Petroleum, and continued on my path. And I was fortunate that there was a period when studies were suspended, so I basically didn't lose anything, which was great. So I ended up specializing in chemical engineering in class. I was one of the best students in terms of interacting with the teachers in all subjects and everything. But I didn't find it difficult to accept these subjects because I felt when I was in class, we were speaking a language that no one outside the classroom could understand. It was such a precise language and all that. By nature, I'm the person who's to discuss and share ideas that people can actually grasp and understand. And at this stage, you could basically say it lasted about 2 years. I wouldn't call it a bad decision because I believe that every decision a person makes 7, the mistakes are things you can learn from. That's true. But my classmates were about 2 years ahead of me at the time. Then I got some advice from one of my brothers, my older brother, may God grant him goodness, Muhammad. He said, why don't you study? Well, since you have that inclination, why don't you study management? I told him, no, those who study management, I've heard they just hang up their degree and that's it. He said, who told you that? Management look at the field, the banks, the companies, how is it? I said, honestly, on the contrary, I'm actually very close to the field I love.
So your brother, may God protect him, asked you how it happened that you love management.
Me, I told him. I told him about my struggles. I told him when I go into the lab, we're doing things that are amazing and necessary and all that. But I just don't find myself in it. I can't, as they say, I just don't find, of course, a person isn't supposed to always find enjoyment, but at least you should be able to accept it. I just couldn't accept the idea.
So from there, he said about you, honestly.
Yeah, I told him, why don't you think about the field of management? He actually had already thought about it before me and faced almost the same problem. He wanted to study engineering and he wanted to study nuclear engineering or something that, but in the end, he made a very brave decision, God bless him, to study hospitality and hotel management. And he was among the first people to graduate from the US with a bachelor's and master's degree from some of the best universities. And he is currently working here as a consultant. So the thing is, he's brave because he went through it himself and apparently understands the dilemma I'm in. So I said, this time I'm going to make the decision to study every major and see which one I actually. So I actually went to the university and looked at each major to see what courses they offered. And I developed a really strong interest in marketing within industrial management. Yes, it was definitely a big shift. But what I did about it was how marketing is a blend of several things, a mix of management sciences, but it also delves into psychology, how a person makes a purchasing decision. Any company in the world, regardless of its size or industry, no matter how incredibly strong you are from an engineering perspective, if your product isn't marketed well enough, you will ultimately fail. So marketing, even though there's still a stereotype about it, meaning people don't give it its due, especially back then. We're talking about the 90s, the early 90s. But I really found myself in marketing. It might not have been the perfect thing for me, but it was the closest, let's say, because it's a fertile field where you interact with the human element. You're not dealing with machines or chemicals. You're dealing with people. So after that, thank God, I graduated from there.
Was there any reaction from your family marketing? Where are you going to work with that?
Honestly, my father, may God have mercy on him, wasn't really. The important thing was just to finish university. And mashallah, King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals is a prestigious university. And then it became clear to me that this was true. A lot of the country's top leaders and officials are graduates from there, especially from the College of Industrial Management. So management, all its specializations are all very important. Maybe the mistake is to say, for example, that this major is the right one and that one isn't suitable. Every major is suitable. In fact, some fields have a much greater impact than medicine or engineering because you are you. This is an important point. You might adopt a certain management theory that affects huge numbers of people, or a social theory, for example. For example, we hear about many ideas that led to the emergence of, let's say, political ideologies. Karl Marx, for instance, who introduced communist thought. He is, you could say, somewhat of a sociologist. But look at the impact he had. How it affected hundreds of millions, possibly billions of people. Whether that impact was good or bad is another topic. But just look at how influential it was. Or take Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, for example. How is it that now the global system is almost entirely based on a book written by someone, Adam Smith? Doctors and engineers, there's nothing wrong with them and they're not lacking in any way, but their impact is limited. For example, a doctor's influence is on the person he treats or the people he treats. So this perspective, it needs to be addressed. Many fields, such as sociology or management, for example, in particular, have a significant and far-reaching impact on us. So it's a mistake for us to look down on them. And this is an excellent boost for sociology students who are unfortunately discouraged and ask, what is our role? That's right. If you look at sociology, even in America, it's considered one of the worst majors in terms of income or job prospects, so to speak. Even though
It's a field that can change the direction of an entire society.
And now you have, right now, the leadership, may God protect them. Right now, you are at a very pivotal stage. You are now setting this wonderful, ambitious plan with Vision 2030. We need people to study its social impacts. We need to understand its effects ourselves. We need to support leaders and officials in understanding how, for example, there are certain things that should, because any economic plan you put in place will have a social impact, and a significant social impact at that. That's why there's an entire specialized field called sociology, It's derived from economic sociology called socioeconomics, which is the science of social or community economics. His only goal, studying how economic policies shape a society, is essential. It's truly important, yet we often act in contradiction. For us, I really believe in the idea that you shouldn't force people to study a particular subject. I don't follow an attraction-based policy. For example, if you want people to have a genuine interest, it's very important to have what are called think tanks. We need to invest in research centers like those that exist in the West. You see, American and European politicians rely heavily on such centers. For example, we all hear about Middle East policy, and that is often developed by think tanks based in America. Why is that? Because these people spend time studying the social and historical aspects, philosophical. They cover all economic fields so that they can see how the policymakers in America approach things. How can I benefit them? How should you do it? But of course, when they look at a society other than their own, they don't really benefit it. They only look out for their own interests, which leads to disastrous results. Therefore, we need to try to understand this and maximize the benefits we can gain, for example, from an ambitious plan or vision like Vision 2030, and minimize the negatives, because there's no plan, vision, or economic situation that doesn't have both positives and negatives. We have to be honest, and we're not claiming to be perfect. Nothing is perfect, but let's talk about this. What you can do is try your best. Sorry, I went off topic, but these are important subjects.
You graduated from university?
Honestly, when I graduated from university, I wanted to work in the field of marketing. But I discovered that at that time, it was a good field, but largely monopolized by international companies. And honestly, as a young Saudi, breaking into that field was extremely difficult. And I can even say that my attempts in that field were quite limited at the time. I also started leaning toward the financial side. Even during my studies, I found that I liked the financial and accounting aspects. And many colleagues who graduated before me, or as I told you, I was a bit late, told me, no, you have to come work with us. So honestly, I applied to a few banks and so on. And I ended up joining the American Bank, which was formerly known as the Saudi American Bank, Samba. And thank God I joined one of the best departments, which was the Treasury Department. Entry into this department is usually very limited because, as you might say, you're dealing with international currencies and financial derivatives. So, as you could say, it's a very specialized, highly technical field to work in. But at the same time, I didn't want to stay there for too long because we go back to the same issue, which is there's hardly any human element in it. You're in a big room, and even back then you needed a security code to enter. You could make a single mistake that would cost the bank huge losses. There are banks that have collapsed because of just one transaction, for example, where someone didn't understand the risks involved in that deal. So here I started asking myself, what specialty would be closer to my interests and involve more interaction and so on? I found that corporate finance and credit was the answer. For those who don't know, corporate finance means that in order to finance a company, you have to study in depth. You study the products, you study the market, you study the owners, the relationships between them, whether they are in agreement, whether they are. So all these things, you have to study them thoroughly. Of course, if your analysis is thorough, and unfortunately a lot of mistakes do happen. But I was at the American Bank,
Honestly, I was lucky to be working at what I consider a school, the Global Financial Group, which is Citibank. The training they provided was extremely rich and truly prepared you. They always used to tell us that any banker who doesn't understand the science of credit is not truly a banker, it's fundamental. Indeed, credit allows you to see, for example, financial rules, but you're not just looking at financial rules, you're actually seeing a story. You're witnessing. I'm saying, you see here they have a problem, they're facing an issue here, they need support here, and over there they have a surplus they're not benefiting from. So this is the idea behind corporate financing. And what's also nice about it is that you're always in contact with people. I was even surprised that from a young age I started meeting major businessmen, and honestly, I found that fascinating. But you might say that I felt satisfied with that. No, actually, I liked it. And at that time, I started to develop an interest in investment.
You left the bank, as you said, you didn't stay long. You left.
Because I moved from the treasury in Riyadh to the American bank, but in the corporate division in the Eastern Province.
The Eastern Province?
Yes, the Eastern Province, because of its proximity to Bahrain. At that time and still now, actually Bahrain is considered a financial center, so it had what are called investment banks, and some of them had gained international reputations, without mentioning any names, of course. But some banks made investments and acquisitions that had a huge impact on a global scale. For example, we all hear about brands like Gucci. Gucci, for instance, was bought by a bank in Bahrain, and it was that bank that relaunched it. Otherwise, the company was about to collapse completely. In fact, some people might have seen the series currently airing about Gucci, showing how it was a bloody investment. There were even murder cases and so on. But imagine that a Bahraini bank, headquartered in Bahrain with offices in New York and London, was the one that acquired Gucci and developed it. I can even mention its name, Investcorp, which is well known, and all its shareholders are Gulf nationals, most of them Saudis. They did a lot. And not just with Gucci. There are many companies that Investcorp work with. Gucci is just one we know. For example, Saks Fifth Avenue, which is a famous retailer across America. Tiffany Co., which is a jewelry company. So this aspect really fascinated me, how you can understand credit and know how to evaluate a company. But here, you're talking about a more advanced stage. It's not just that I give this company money and they pay me back. No, I'm taking on the risk, giving them the money, staying involved with them, and hopefully we profit from the credit. Don't give me my money back. If you don't give me my money back, I'll go bankrupt. I sell everything and take my money. With investing, it's not just that the risk is even greater. You invest, you get involved and own the company. So you need to go through an even more thorough stage of research, analysis, and scrutiny.
You get on board with them in the same boat and set sail together.
Exactly. So you really have to make your decision after a very careful study. We call it in this field due diligence, or in Arabic, I think it's called tadkil al-nafi al-jahala, negative diligence for ignorance. Meaning you can't just come later and say, oh, I didn't know. No, you have to take in all the data. Since that time, I really like this aspect a lot. And in our field of investment, we call it private equity investments, or in English, private equity, which comes after venture capital, or what is known as venture capital. So I wanted to understand how they actually do things like this. At that time, there were some positive developments happening in Bahrain. For example, after Investcorp, which was a conventional bank, another bank emerged that did the same thing, but in an Islamic way. It was called First Islamic Bank, First Islamic Investment Bank, which later changed its name to Arcapita. They honestly made a major transformation in figuring out how to do this process, which is fundamentally based on interest in conventional bank loans in an Islamic way. So this was a development. I mean, even I started to feel that I was not keeping up. How do they do it in an Islamic way? And you know, at that time, Islamic banking was also quite limited in Saudi Arabia. At that time, the founding CEO of one of the investment banks reached out to me. Gulf Finance House, which is currently one of the major established banks. Mr. SM Jannah, he contacted me and said he wanted to talk to me about joining them and so on. He told me that their idea at the time was even more ambitious. I mean, to put it extremely, they were talking about Islamic private equity and venture capital investments in the region. I asked, "Are you sure in this region?" He told me, "Yes, in this region." What also encouraged me was that most of the founders were major financial institutions from all over the Gulf. Almost all the Islamic banks, Dubai Islamic Bank, Bahrain Islamic Bank, and Kuwait Finance House were founders, and all of them were board members. So these are people who definitely know what they're doing. This idea was truly one of the greatest things. I was really very excited about it. And this move happened around the year 2000. I remember it was in March 2000, and the plan was that I would go to Bahrain, maybe work for a few years, and then come back. And subhanAllah, since then,
Continued.
I have continued until this very day.
Mashallah, your career is impressive. May God grant you even more. Let's go back to the first point, which is Ras Al Noura.
Yes.
The model you saw and loved in Ras Al Noura, did you see it in any other region in Saudi Arabia?
To be honest with you, no. There are models that have remained in their original state, like villages and settlements. But for me, I'm more interested in how you achieve sustainability. Ras Al Noura was a sustainable model because you brought together people from various regions, backgrounds, and walks of life, and you provided them, let's say, you introduced an economic aspect to the matter so that they could, yes, so that this way of living and this life could continue. Of course, it was affected, and Ras Al Noura is not the same as it was back then. And this is an aspect, I mean, I can say this. I wouldn't call it an obsession, but it's the thing that occupies my mind the most. How, in a way, the first boom that happened in the 70s had many effects and consequences on society, many of them negative, and we know this. For example, some people started, for instance, to take on certain jobs. And this is something, for example, that my father and that generation used to criticize a lot. But the issue is a bit complicated. I mean, you can't really blame people. You can't just come, and I believe that any job market or profession is a product of the cultural and social fabric. So maybe for us, the Ras Al Noura experience hasn't been repeated, or even Ras Al Noura itself, in a way. This beautiful model faded away because we westernized the labor market. I mean, there was a kind of westernization of the labor market. When I say labor market, I mean all professions. If you go to any country in the world, you'll see the foundation. The foundation is that the people working there are from the country itself. Of course, from the perspective of that time, this is one of the things we might discuss a lot, and many people disagreed with me, and I respect their opinions. But in any country, as you might say, the work should suit the local people. So, for example, it shouldn't happen that, I mean, I hit you. This is always my argument with many people. Suppose, for instance, a country is known for its citizens being hardworking and diligent. Let's talk about a country like Germany. If Germany allowed any investor or company owner to employ, I know Germany well and I visit it often. The German citizen is among the people who never give up any of their rights as a worker. And I assure you, if it were allowed to use in any country in the world, Germany, Korea, which country, Japan, if things were done the way we do them, you'd find the German sitting at home and the Korean sitting at home. Of course you can't. I mean, as a citizen, you want your work to reflect your way of life, your culture. You can get married. You want to have social status. So these aspects, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself on this topic. But what I want to tell you is, I haven't seen this anywhere else. Because we went in a direction where we didn't become like some countries that say, I have wealth. But for the citizens, prices go up. I don't care if they go up as long as the money circulates among them. So, for example, it's true that in a country like Norway, you might pay 60 reals just to eat a sandwich at a restaurant. But you see, the salary of someone working in that restaurant, for example, might be 12, 0 rials or 20 rials. So the question is, do you want to get things cheaply while you don't have a job or only have a small income? Or is it okay for you to pay more and become like Japan or Norway and those expensive countries, but where people have jobs? And as you say, the salaries are rewarding. They reflect the economy.
All right, Saleh, let me take 2 steps back and try to lay the groundwork for the topic. Right now, you're linking the economic situation with the social situation and the social fabric in a certain area. That's true.
Yes. And I'm not, as you might say, inventing something new compared to any economist, sociologist, or even research centers. Without a doubt, this isn't something unique or special, because economic policies always have social impacts. From what you said, I concluded that, well, in Aramco, they respect their employees no matter who they are. So regardless of the social diversity in the region, everyone is harmonious. And it's a great environment where everyone accepts each other. There's no problem at all. On the contrary, what happened with us was actually an increase in respect. Unfortunately, the mistake is that we don't want citizens to work, and that's the real issue.
That's where the mistake lies.
On the contrary, Aramco actually made things better, but it told me one thing: I can live a dignified life with this profession. And this is how it should be, that any profession, any job, you see, Mr. Khalid, a lot of people, even myself, first of all, I want to make a very important point. I am not criticizing any party involved in the economic process. All of the every party has sought to find the best ways to achieve the goals they desire. So, as a businessman, I can't blame another businessman. For example, if I ask him, why haven't you hired citizens? He'll say, I'm a businessman. I work for profit within the system I'm placed in. At the same time, I have no problem with our expatriate brothers who have helped build the country and have done a great job. May God reward them. The issue is that there has been, let's say, a consensus among everyone about how, for example, an economy like those of the Gulf countries should function. The question here is, are we actually getting the best possible return from this or not? In my opinion, we are not, because any economic policy should be. I should try as much as possible to enhance opportunities for human well-being above anything else. And by human, I mean, of course, the citizens of each country. I don't mean that I mean the citizens, but that doesn't mean I want to do without our expatriate brothers, never. On the contrary. They are our brothers and families, and they have done a lot for us. But, for example, if we go to extremes or fall short in some aspect, that is a mistake. We should be brave enough to discuss this and say, look, everyone, how do we see things now? Many countries that used to talk about human rights know this issue is a concern for everyone in the world. For example, what is the South African president saying now? He's building a Waldos that make him a fool. Could we do something like that ourselves? I see that those who always talk about freedoms and helping minorities and helping people, when it comes down to it, unfortunately, this kind of awareness doesn't exist here in the Gulf countries. When it comes to these matters, it's like when it comes to people's livelihoods, which everywhere in the world means jobs, you see people all over the world rise up. In Europe, for example, this is their number one standard. You'll notice that in any election campaign, they always talk about how many jobs they'll create. Or a president will boast about his achievements by saying, I created this many jobs. It's not, for example, about respect. For us, the issue is economic. You really have to think carefully before you intervene. The ideal economy is usually one where you let things be just supply and demand. That's the ideal. But sometimes you do have to step in for certain things. So, what was nice about the Noura presidency? Aramco wanted the citizens themselves to take on many of the jobs. a lot of which were technical and professional positions and so on. And you see, they gave them rights, regulated working hours, and paid vacations. But when you compare that, for example, to the private sector, which often operates differently in terms of employee benefits and work conditions. Also, I'm not criticizing the private sector. The private sector was under a lot of pressure as well and so on. But in reality, what rights did someone working as a laborer in the private sector have? That's why you find that any Saudi or any Gulf national doesn't hesitate to work for the oil company or for the government. Why? Because in the end, it's always said that the salary isn't really the main thing. There are people, I'm telling you, who do jobs with very low pay, but they do it to preserve their dignity. The most important thing for a person is their value as a human being. I can assure you that if someone worked in many of the trades we have, they would earn a much higher salary than, say, a security guard. That's true, but there's a negative stereotype, and that's what we need to work on. That's the real danger. This is what I see, and it's the big question I've always had. Why does this idea exist? I'm not even talking about going to developed countries. Why does it even exist in some Arab countries? It's unfair that people here have to ask themselves this question. The idea was that we thought, let's bring in cheap labor, but it turned out later that it's not actually cheap. And at the same time, they're not skilled professionals, so we ended up with problems. The work started being done at a very low level by people who, for the most part, don't have any specialization they learn on the job, at our expense. In reality, I wonder, do we actually have any cheap labor here? I mean, when labor becomes expensive in certain countries, they turn to inventing other methods, like using machinery. For example, in a country like America, building a house there can actually be cheaper than building one in the Gulf. You might find that surprising, but that's the reality. You see a lot of tasks because they're faced with this challenge that if you have to hire someone, the citizens or legal residents of the country, all of them pay taxes to the government and so on. So they prevent violations. There's no such thing as I'm starting a company, give me permits to bring in 30 workers or 200 or even 2,000 workers. That doesn't exist. You go serve the country, pay your dues. If salaries go up, that's fine, let them increase. But the money stays within the country. Of course, you know that story about the grain of barley, which actually represents something very important in the economy. Unfortunately, people don't really understand it well enough. And that is the financial side. The financial cycle, there's a very interesting short story about it that we can mention today. It's said that there was a businessman, maybe a contractor or something, who had a road construction project. The road passed through a village, so he had to go to the site and spend the night there. He asked if there were any hotels, and they told him there was only one hotel. So he went to the hotel and asked them, "What's your best room?" They said, "We have a suite." So he asked how much the suite costs, and the hotel owner, seeing an opportunity, said it was 500 euros. The businessman didn't mind he had a luxury car. After all, so he put 500 euros on the counter and said, "I'll finish my meetings and come back in the evening." It happened that the hotel owner had suppliers he owed money to. So he took the 500 euros he just received and paid the supplier. The supplier gets his goods from farmers and butchers and so on, and he too was in debt. He took the 500 euros and went to pay off his debt to the farmer. The farmer, in turn, relied on people he owed for things like fertilizers and other supplies. And he used the money to pay the supplier who had organized the wedding party for his son at this same hotel, but hadn't yet paid the hotel owner. So he took the 500 and paid it, and the 500 kept circulating, settling all the debts in the village, and eventually returned to the hotel owner. But the story didn't end. the contractor got a call saying he had to return. So he said, unfortunately, I didn't like the place. And the hotel owner gave him back the 500 and he left. So look at what happened. The same amount of money made a full economic cycle, settling everyone's debts, and in the end, it was still there, nothing was lost. Do you know what our problem is? All of them were locals. If just one person had taken that 500 and sent it abroad, what would have happened? The cycle would have been broken, and that's exactly what happens to us. So I can say it's a major issue, meaning it's a problem that has a significant impact on the country's economy and the daily lives of its people. What you're aiming for now is to keep the money circulating within the country rather than letting it flow out to other nations. The biggest benefit of this approach is a significant increase in people's well-being as more resources and opportunities become available to everyone living in the country. I don't want to give examples, but for instance, even incomes will increase significantly because the money is present and you're not relying, as they say, only on a source that comes and goes. The money is there, accumulating and growing. This is a very important aspect. I try to simplify this concept for many people because many people think that the economy is just the budget. And the budget is the budget. No, the budget is not the economy. The budget is just a part of the economy. And what's more important than the budget are other components. For example, let's take you as a person. There's a difference between your income and your budget. Your annual expenses depend on how much you earn in a year. And from your wealth as well. The economy is wealth. It's the accumulations you build up. If money keeps circulating, that means you'll have accumulations, you'll have creativity, and you'll experience significant growth. But if every time you get your annual income, let's say, for example, you have workers who aren't productive, then all your income just goes to me, and that's it. But if, for example, you give this money to your children and they spend it within the household, that means you're all growing together. Then tomorrow, one of them might come to you and say, for example, I want to do something here. So this is the idea that economic policies have social impacts, and these social impacts can be very significant. Sometimes, to be honest, they can even reach security aspects or even political aspects. Let's even say religious aspects. Many social scientists talk about how behavior, imagine, for example, someone has a good job. What are the chances that someone like him will become an extremist? But if you give me people who are, as you might say, disconnected from the economic process, these people are fertile ground for extremist ideas, simply because they have no income. So you've brought up an important point.
The point is, why does society look at certain professions as, inferior jobs, as inferior? I have an explanation for this, though I'm not sure if it's correct. I want you to confirm this for me. Around 50 or 60 years ago, during the time of King Khalid, may God have mercy on him, job opportunities opened up. Back then, people either worked hard labor, ran their own small businesses, or managed, for example, a workshop. These were the kinds of jobs people had in the early 70s, more or less. At that time, it was Saudis who held most of these jobs.
Subscribe to Al Multaka Podcast on Apple Podcasts and be among the first to hear our latest episodes.
These jobs, especially the government ones, didn't really open up. So they said, for example, a person used to make, let's say, 300 riyals a month from his shop. But with these jobs, they said, come if you have a middle school certificate, we'll give you, for example, 500 riyals in an office and you get 2 days off. You only work from 7 o'clock to 2 o'clock and things like that. So people's perspective, and I don't blame them, was, well, 500. 300, 500, other than 300 riyals, no one would hesitate about that. No, I'd go for the 500. The strange thing is, those who left for these jobs stayed at the 500 level. But the ones who stayed in the shop saw their income rise from 300 to 0 riyals. Why? Because when those people get their salaries, they come and buy from this guy and so on. In addition to that, and this is something, honestly, I don't know how to solve. Maybe this isn't a good thing in societies in general. People don't see the person who works hard with his own hands the same way they see someone who's well-dressed, drives a nice car, and even has a fancy vacation. So I think this is one of the reasons people avoid these kinds of jobs. This perception, the idea that I don't look good enough.
So if I understand correctly, so if I get your question, I see it as a result, not a cause. And the proof is, as you mentioned, our fathers used to work in these kinds of jobs. We were the poorest people in the world, so we are the poorest of the poorest. I mean, even the countries that are now considered the poorest in the world used to be, compared to us, rich. We didn't even have access to water, right? So they didn't feel this kind of embarrassment. This sense of inferiority is actually the result of many accumulated factors and pressures, as we mentioned. The idea that we want to honor the citizen, and why shouldn't the citizen become a manager? And this is something that, for example, a country like Norway avoided and understood. In economics, we have two cases. One very well-known case is called the Dutch disease.
The Dutch disease.
The Dutch disease? This Dutch disease. It's a well-known country, of course. The Kingdom of the Netherlands. They were real pioneers in industries, especially in the food industry. I even visited it myself and saw that they have museums about it now. Unfortunately, these industries were lost and turned into museums. Honestly, you see museums to almost the entire food industry, especially what's called food processing. You could say that the Netherlands was way ahead of the rest of the world. In the 1950s, the Dutch oil company, known as Royal Dutch Shell, Royal Dutch Oil, began exploration internationally in various different parts of the world. Since it was government-owned, it started generating significantly huge revenues. So the Dutch people worked in all industries and in every field, contributing to the nation's growth.
The first political policy was that they controlled the industry.
It was only natural, but suddenly, when things started going well and the government had huge revenues, there was this tendency to pamper their people. So they started putting in place laws, for example, if you brought a medical report, for instance. You sit at home and they correct your actions. So glory be to God. Half of the people are disabled and cannot work. Even the Dutch told them that at the same time, if you do not work, the government will still spend on you. So people started saying to you, I will get the same income if I work. It is better. But that means I will be sitting around, not working, comfortable, and I will get a good income and travel and come and go and so on. So this is what happened. A unique situation emerged in the economy. You had a rich government and a poor people, not exactly poor, but not wealthy to the level that matched the government's riches because they didn't want to work. So this situation became well known. The Dutch disease, the Dutch disease. I watched a great lecture by the Prime Minister of Norway. It's available on social media. And he said something interesting. He said, we have to avoid this. Because Norway is a country that also discovered oil, or rather started producing oil at a later stage after the Gulf countries. So they came to the Gulf, visited the Gulf and said, we want to avoid the mistake that happened, the Dutch disease, and unfortunately, even the mistake that happened in the Gulf. So we used to say that our most important priority was for the Norwegian citizen to keep waking up at 7 in the morning and going to work as if nothing had changed.
Regardless of the oil wealth.
They were even more cautious, making sure that citizens wash their hands of it. In fact, they have some of the highest taxes in the world. And the second thing is that all oil revenues go to the sovereign wealth fund. Nothing enters the country except for 4%, which comes from investment returns, not from the actual revenues.
Meaning, after they take the money and invest it, they only take 4%.
From return.
From the returns.
And that's for the people they work.
The people work. He said, this is the big challenge. He said, we won't make this mistake. So here's the issue, Mr. Khaled. When you see all of this, what you are actually observing, in my view, are the results, let me call them, that of what I consider to be wonderfully structured and carefully implemented economic policy. These outcomes, as I see it, are a direct consequence of thoughtful planning and strategic decision-making in the realm of economic policy. But the economy shows no mercy. If you lose the competitive edge and the balance of supply and demand, you'll suffer whether now or later. And that's what happened. I mean, you went from peoples who were among the poorest in the world doing any kind of work. I mean, all our fathers and grandfathers worked without any shame, to peoples who have now become known around the world as people who don't like to work, that we're lazy. And that's simply not true. The Saudi and Gulf citizen, in the fields left open to them, are among the most talented and energetic people I've ever worked with. And I've worked with almost all European, American, and Asian nationalities. In fact, I discovered that we possess initiative and dedication. But just give me the right environment.
Excuse me, what do you mean by the fields left open to them?
For example, take the real estate sector. The government, may God protect it, at least as a source of income, left real estate relatively open. There were some restrictions. But from that time until now, those restrictions have started to ease a bit. So what did the Saudis and Gulf citizens do in real estate? They excelled, truly excelled. Just look at Dubai, look at Abu Dhabi, look at Riyadh, look at Mecca. When I see real estate businessmen, or even a young Saudi just starting out in real estate, and I see the level of activity they've put into it, it's rare to find that among other nationalities. So the issue here is that you can't just come and create a situation that doesn't suit me at all. For example, once I was talking to someone and he said to me, what are you saying? Do you want a Saudi to carry a sack of cement on his back and climb 5 floors with it? I told him, no, that's not going to happen. The one who carries a sack of cement on his back, that's a poor country without resources. We need to have mechanisms in place. And a Saudi can work as a construction worker, just like Aramco did. By the way, they gave him a uniform. He had set working hours, and during peak heat times, like at noon, he wouldn't work. There was safety, there were factors. If you do this, you'll see the community respond. But right now, this is difficult even to the extent that I am one of those who, one of my proposals is that I believe the government, may God protect them. For example, if investment is made in companies whose main goal isn't profit, because the biggest challenge for us is to remove the stereotypes about us, as you mentioned, those condescending views. I really want us to have restaurants where Saudi men and women both work together, but with truly decent salaries and proper rights, and where they genuinely have a say even as waiters or waitresses, so they can actually make decisions. For example, when I go to Europe, I accept this. The waiter there can even kick me out of the restaurant if I make a mistake. And that's just how it is. I remember once, just because someone moved the chair, the waiter came and told him to put it back, gesturing for him to return it. And he did. Here, this kind of job is treated with humiliation. It's demeaned. Why? Because the income from it is very low. People work in these jobs. No matter what, really. Of course, now the situation has improved a lot. But they will never have the same rights as a citizen. You see, a citizen has family and social obligations. When I go as an expatriate to a country, I have nothing in my life except this job. So if you want me to work 12 or 16 hours, I have no problem with that. But a citizen can't do that. The job really needs to be tailored for them.
Okay, I'm sorry. Did you notice that they forgave me?
This word.
That maybe the Saudi people don't have the fighting spirit to prove themselves in this kind of hardship. Sorry, but honestly, look.
In medicine, they don't have that fighting spirit. Look at real estate. They don't have that fighting spirit here either.
Here?
In investment, look at the fields that have been left for them. The ones I can say that Saudi youth have no problem getting into. In fact, now, mashallah, many young Saudi men and women have ventured into fields that, until now, society wasn't even ready for example, what they call baristas. those who make coffee and they've excelled. On the contrary, I am completely against this idea, and I actually disagree with many businessmen about it. Of course, we can't just come and say that the entire population is not right for you to be following a certain path and implementing a policy. Naturally, you will have results from that, and you need a generation or two for things to change, and you have to accept that. Because in the end, it's your country where will you end up if you don't change. You're the one who loses. I mean, I know of some example 7 in some Gulf countries, unfortunate, where expatriates have not only become workers, but have also become business owners due to what I see as an illogical implementation of investment encouragement policies. When I look at it, my goal in encouraging investment is always simple enough. One should complicate the matter, creating jobs. That's the result. If you create jobs, your economy will thrive. Jobs are the best metric for me. I mean, they're the most important. When I used to work in the treasury, the most important number you look at in the treasury to understand the direction of the entire market, American global, and the environment is this one. The job growth rate or the unemployment rate. This number affects the economy. Why? Because it's everything. When you have jobs, you have people who have the ability to buy, which means the economic cycle continues, and you're not losing.
So what I understood from what you said is that when you talk about job creation, you don't mean just any jobs, but jobs with certain characteristics.
New salary orbits salary. That's something you discuss on another level. I mean, if you come now and launch projects with billions, the return on them should be as high as possible. Of course, if you can, even many foreign or developed countries nowadays resort to hiring migrant or foreign workers. I'm not against that. The issue is just to what extent, for example, I work in the private sector, and this was my first shock. Man, there are jobs where the people in them honestly don't have a specialization, and the work is very simple. But this man has been doing this job for 30 years. You're telling me a young man or woman couldn't do this job? Honestly, they could do it, and they could do it even better. So that's when I started to ask myself, is it really that many of these jobs, what exactly is our problem? Is it that we lack morals? Honestly, 80% of the jobs in the private sector are simple jobs. It's not like they're splitting the atom or anything. These are simple jobs. What I discovered is that there's an addiction to expatriate labor. And this addiction, I blame the businessmen or the private sector. If you did this in any country in the world, the private sector would get addicted to it because the expatriate worker is an obedient person. He's the ideal worker. If you want him to leave tomorrow, he'll leave. If you want him to work 16 hours, he'll do it. Because citizens are difficult. Citizens are difficult in any country. Citizens speak up. Citizens criticize. Citizens are present with you. But with the expatriate, that's I just remembers, I don't know what looks and leaves. I see that this has actually harmed us because our expatriate brothers have rights. But when you open things up without limits, you start to have violations. So the point is, it's not true that just because labor is cheap, it's not true that we don't have the skills. No, honestly, there are no skills. I mean, I honestly remember, I was employed coming from the University of Petroleum.
Uh-huh.
A guy from an Asian country shows up. I simply suggest join a normal training course. This person, mashallah, gets sent to Geneva. He attends a course over there. Why though? What makes him stand out? So now you have a situation, this is very important, you've managed to create a situation with certain gains. I can almost say for sure that they count as gains. Gains from the size of the remittances that are counted. I mean, for some countries, these are matters of national security. It's not so easy for you to just come and say, why don't Saudi youth work in this job? You're dealing with a fully integrated infrastructure. I know young people who try to start, for example, newcomers among Arabs in Al Bukhaira. But honestly, I know some Saudis who tried to open grocery stores. They discovered, for example, that the grocery stores are controlled by a certain community. The suppliers stopped bringing goods to them. One person swore to me saying, I ended up having to go buy from one of the hypermarkets. He said, no one comes to deliver to me because they have a closed off market. Let me give you an example. There's a guy, may God reward him, I can't recall his name, who did research on the grocery store sector. In the city of Kerala in India, if you get a visa to work, of course, we respect our brothers and all that. But this is just the situation. And you open a grocery store in any of the Gulf countries. The bank in Kerala gives you up to about 250 zero rials. Shaker, you're talking about right now, so it's become a source of income, not just for Saudi Arabia and Saudis, but for many countries. For these countries, it's not easy for you to just come in overnight, of course, meaning there's a fully integrated infrastructure. You can't just come and enter the Saudi construction and contracting sector just because you say it's easy. It's not easy. In most cases, we're talking about something which we'll come back to discuss later, that you'll just be a capitalist businessman, not an entrepreneur, meaning you won't be the person who understands contracting, the progression and so on. They didn't set up a contracting company for you. No, you'll definitely need to rely on certain people for support. They're the ones who manage the work while you just get the credit. And unfortunately, this is what I'm telling you. A very large part of the private sector operates this way.
What's the ideal model that you see as suitable for job creation? How should it be?
The ideal role of the government in any economic model or in the economy in general, it relies heavily on functioning as an organizer, meaning it is primarily responsible for coordinating and managing various activities or tasks. However, there are times when it also plays a stimulating or motivating role, such as by launching a new program or introducing an initiative specifically designed to encourage development or progress in a certain area, with the intention of motivating you to take action and get involved in doing this particular thing. But we need to understand one very important thing. Jobs. You can encourage them, create opportunities for growth, or even establish entirely new sectors or streams of activity within the economy. However, in any typical economy, it is almost always the private sector that plays the most significant role in driving development and innovation, and not just any private sector. These institutions are very important. Small and medium-sized enterprises, often referred to as SMEs, make up at least 70% of the job market in the workforce, which means they play a crucial role in employment. Let me ask you honestly, is this the case in the Gulf countries? Of course not. Here you have a problem. You have a problem because if 70% of jobs are supposed to be created by small and medium-sized enterprises, then where do I stand? Because you do have small and medium-sized enterprises, but when are you actually present in them? Here. This is the challenge. This is where the lawmakers stand. This is what the leadership, may God protect them, realized here in the country. Vision 2030 came in a way that focused on the individual. If you look at the fundamental principles of the vision, when you read them carefully, you see that it's exactly about this. The ultimate goal is truly the quality of life for people. So now, when you come and tell me that you want to expect to have a successful economy, that means that 70 to 80%, look, your current situation is that 70%. 80% of your jobs are in small and medium enterprises, but what percentage of employees are actually in them? It's regrettable. For example, in Saudi Arabia, we have about 13 million expatriates. 13 million expatriates, most of whom are employed in small and medium enterprises. The idea is, how do you make life better for everyone? Even the expatriate has the right to a decent life, and likewise, the businessman has the right to find the required skills. Therefore, if I were to put forward a thesis on this subject, my position would be that there is absolutely nothing inherently wrong or problematic about the creation or establishment of commercial and economic entities. In fact, forming such organizations is a common and accepted practice in modern society, and it does not in itself imply any negative consequences or unethical intention. The goal is to change the stereotype. What does it mean to change a stereotype? For example, take me as an example. I am reconsidering a profession like contracting, for instance. If a company is established with the primary aim of carrying out various types of contracting work, and this work is specifically intended to be performed through the use of machinery and mechanical equipment, then the company's main objective is to engage in projects or services using the latest technological means and strives to be profitable. But even if I don't make a profit, even if I lose, I gain something bigger. I want to influence the direction of the economy. I am always against the policy of pushing. I've mentioned this before. I always use the policy of attraction. What does the policy of attraction mean? Put something for people at the end. a reward at the end of the road. You will find that people head toward that thing. If you put that reward for them, it has to be suitable for them, then you'll see people starting to specialize in that field. You'll find someone who says, honestly, I don't mind working as a waiter in a restaurant because I'm learning the restaurant business and then I'll open my own place. I'll give you an example. For instance, one of the investments that happened in the bakery sector in Europe, a very large bakery company. Its story is simple. He was a simple person. You could even say, I think he was an orphan. So out of compassion, his mother spoke to the owner of a small bakery and the boy became a baker. This person worked in this profession and developed himself until he became the head baker. And they started to rely on him. After a while, he opened a small bakery of his own. See how their role works? What's up, you here? This is exactly what unfortunately we are missing here. Here we are disconnected. I sometimes simplify it and say, imagine a car with a very powerful engine but no transmission. So how is the power transferred? That's exactly what's happening. Right now, if in English I'll say the citizen isn't with you in the development process, then, I came and established big companies and so on. For example, the country, may God protect, I established a company like SABIC. Out of concern, we want Saudis to work at SABIC, at Aramco, we want Saudization. So when you look at the country, you find it's operating in this way. The question, or rather the challenge we have here, is the private sector. Because with the private sector, you can't just come in and after they've relied on a business model for 50 years, expect it to collapse overnight. So what you can do is start to create a new mindset among people. Our young men and women need to understand that many of the vocational jobs you don't respect, these can actually provide an income for someone who might not even have a doctorate degree. They can earn you a living, maybe even more than a doctor or an engineer. You might see a simple contractor, and you might even talk down to him or feel sorry for him. But this person could be taking on contracts for, say, 10 houses a year. How much do you think he makes? These are not small amounts of money. These are significant sums indeed. The issue, and this is an important point, is that the nature of the work, the way the job is done, doesn't suit us. So what I hope for example, is that there would be some kind of initiative to try to change this stereotype by creating, as you might say, exemplary and ideal work models that are suitable for our sons and daughters. And as a result, they would start to move in that direction. Someone might say, honestly, this job could open doors for me instead of just sitting around doing nothing. I'm not even good at math. These jobs are not the end of the world. You could become the most successful businessman or businesswoman through simple things. These are jobs that you can turn into companies. And this is also an important aspect that we start to reinforce this. Honestly, there are some wonderful initiatives that I have seen. For example, I remember one of the big Saudi companies. Honestly, it really impressed me. It was an initiative from them where they talked about how they tried, for example, to convince people. Honestly, it was Abdul Latif Jameel company. They have an initiative called Bab Risk Jameel. So, for example, he was talking about bringing someone, for instance, one of the brothers, I think he was of Levantine nationality, to work as a barber. He says, I'm a barber and I'm proud of my work and I make an excellent income. These are the things we need to work on. Because as the English saying goes, there's an elephant in the room. We're trying to pretend it's not there. No, it is there. You are there. You have a problem. We have a problem. Our problem is that it's not about money. It's not just about money. And a lot of people know that. And if he thinks about it a little, he'll realize that the professionals he deals with, for example, you want someone to come fix something in your house, 500 riyals. 500 riyals. If you do one job a day for 500 riyals every day, you're talking about 15-0.
Monthly.
Okay, but he does 5 or 6 jobs a day. So how do you know? When you look at the volume of remittances, for example, as a country like Saudi Arabia, our economic size is approximately 1 to 30th the size of, for example, a market or economy like America.
That means 30.
Meaning America is 30 times or 27 times our size. In 2000, we were the second country in the world after America in remittances.
Wow.
Imagine that. Not Germany. Maybe even the entire European market couldn't imagine that. I'm not sure about this, but just imagine we are the second country in the world. And let's go back to that story. Can you imagine what we're losing here?
So our economy is 30 times smaller than America's, and yet we're the second country after them in remittances.
In remittances.
And this is documented, by the World Bank. And the problem is, if you imagine if this money had stayed over the course of 50 years, 60 years, what could have happened? Now, you might ask me, how would it have stayed? I'd say it would have created a state of disruption. And here, at this point in our discussion, I have an important question to consider. Did we, perhaps unintentionally, really get too carried away with the idea and process of development, pushing forward without always stopping to reflect on the possible consequences? It made it harder for citizens to get involved in jobs. When we talk about development now, Vision 2030 addressed this aspect very well, ensuring that the citizen is present. But citizens still face challenges in lower level professions in similar areas. But if we go back, for example, and talk about the first boom, the idea here is essentially that when you say that you want to make a significant transition or change in these upcoming 10 years, what you really mean is that you are planning to have prosperous cities and networks of roads and so on. This inevitably forces you, whether you like it or not, to rely on foreign labor, because the citizen was not prepared. There was no preparation. There were no skills. And this is not really a problem. It was possible. So there should have been a kind of precise balance between us. Any project, if it doesn't have a return, and at the same time, if the citizen is a partner in its achievement, we might have reservations and say, or at least ask how. How can we ensure that the citizen is, as much as possible, a partner in it? And this, thank God, is what I see now in the area of division and so on. But the challenge still exists when it comes to professions. The challenge remains. And we go back to the problem I mentioned to you, that in any economy, the size of any economy, 80% of the economy's size is made up of small and medium enterprises, and 80% of the labor market and jobs.
All right, let's change direction. And instead of focusing on the issue of job creation, why don't we increase the number of Saudi entrepreneurs entering this sector?
He's a businessman, as I told you. The first thing he needs is a fertile environment. He needs hope beyond oil. For example, when I come, let's talk, you reminded me of the example of grocery stores. Starting a business in the Gulf is way harder than doing it in Europe, for example. Look, they say that doing business in Europe and America is tough and competitive. I never say it's easy over there, because it's not. Here, as I told you before, as I mentioned earlier, there's a significant abundance of affordable, low-cost labor available. So when you try to compete with them, it's very, very difficult. There is a fully developed infrastructure that has been built over decades. Even the language, even Arabic, might not help you if you want to open a grocery store, because you have to speak either Urdu or... the point is, if you want to start a business in Saudi Arabia, if that business isn't protected, whether by law, by regulation, or for some other specific reason, such as being protected from outside competition, for example, for instance. If it's something cultural, traditional, or social that only a citizen truly understands, appreciates, and knows how to do, then you might be able to do it. But if you're trying to enter these fields, and honestly, I see this as a very fundamental point, because it's the right of any citizen in any country in the world. And this is something the government is really striving for. And I see it, but we as a people need to understand. Many times, the government comes and launches projects and so on, and you find that people don't understand. They say, don't let prices go up on us. Do you really believe that we are in a more competitive position than many even of the advanced markets? I was surprised that, as I mentioned to you, you could build a house in a European country for less than it would cost to build a house here in the Gulf. One time I did my shopping at a hypermarket in France. I loved 2 cars when I came to pay about 500 riyals, about 1,000. That's about 100 euros, something like that. So, the idea that cheap labor is making a difference for us isn't really delivering the results we're talking about.
or the goals that used to be achieved in the past. Because you are you in the end. I don't see, some companies offer the same prices all over the world. For example, there's a famous global Spanish company that offers the same prices everywhere. And that's one of the reasons for their success. Okay, when you go to this company in London, they're paying much higher wages for their employees. All of them are locals, or even if they're residents, they get the same salary. Locals can accept less. And yet, you still find they have discounts and offers. But here, you don't have that. So, what did this idea of excessive recruitment cause for us? It's become clear to us just leave. The business owners, I know them. Here, their creativity is focused on just one thing. Cutting costs, for example, they don't try to be creative in other areas, for instance. For example, offering you greater value. Or reducing costs in a way that doesn't affect quality or anything like that. So what you find here is that we just cut salaries, hire more people, and pay lower wages. This never leads to any real creativity. Now, let's talk about entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are important, but you see, you're not always going to have them. Out of every 10 people, if you get one entrepreneur, that's good. Most people need jobs. The modern lifestyle now is such that one of the main things that citizens in any country in the world are looking for is jobs. Because you are you now. Life today is different. It's not like before when you would just wait for a job. It's actually a very old concept. There have been periods like that, but the way we live now, ever since the Industrial Revolution and all these developments, most people these days now say, I really need a job. Because now you have a country with well-established systems and various different and thriving commercial sectors. So the important point is, yes, you have entrepreneurs, right? But that doesn't mean you should simply leave business entirely to others. We need a certain percentage, every country in the world needs to have that. But excess is the problem.
All right, let's continue the conversation and move on to the work you're currently involved in, which is investment. What type of investment are you working on right now?
Well, look, my involvement in private equity investment has played a very significant role in understanding the nature of our Gulf market for private equity and venture capital investment. Let's say it's a very important part of the economic development process. And this is what has developed many companies in the West. Why is that? Because many entrepreneurs come with companies, some even come to you with just an idea, and they find someone to invest with them. And as a result, simple ideas, small projects, and small businesses are transformed and given an institutional and organizational dimension. So it's not just, come here, I'll give you money. No, there has to be a board of directors, there has to be governance. There have to be certain standards applied. So this is the idea behind investment in this field. And this, when I told you I started in 2000, at that time as a concept, very few people knew about it and they thought it was impossible for us to do it. And honestly, this is one of the things I consider myself lucky to have started from the very beginning. We worked really hard to establish this idea among people that yes, it is possible for you to invest in startups and so on. And thank God, now you can see how the market has become. It's perhaps the most attractive investment sector for many investors. But I want to go back and mention a point. For example, one of the challenges we faced when we were looking for companies, we would come and, for example, meet the founder. Then when we started talking to him about the investment details and got involved with him, and especially when we get into investments like these, usually you bring in a consulting firm as a bank or as an investment company who understands the industry. Since you're entering the IT sector, what do you know? You're a banker. So you bring in a specialist with you. Or maybe you're bringing in a new CEO who really understands the craft. Many times we were surprised to find that the company owners were actually not specialists in the field. Can I really call him an investor? He's a capitalist businessman. For example, you'll find that he has a business in the tech sector and another business in retail, like in food or in clothing. It means it's not clear. I'd call him an entrepreneur. He's a capitalist businessman, an investor. He reminds me, for example, of a well-known figure like Warren Buffett. But Buffett is specialized in investment. So for instance, when we'd visit a certain company, we'd find that the person with the actual knowledge was usually not the owner of the company. He might be an owner in some way we're not aware of, or something like that. But he's not officially the owner of the company. And usually he's someone with the expertise. And often he's not Saudi. So we always run into issues. Because as an investor, who should I care about? Should I care about the owner or the one who actually has the expertise and the money? No. Why? Because if that guy leaves tomorrow, I'm in trouble, since the business relies on both investment and expertise. I mean, who's the one actually running things for you? The one who actually knows the business. If you own the business, you can sell me a share in it, but I have no idea what kind of agreements you have with this person, for example, or if this person suddenly decides to just leave the country. So I'm not required to manage the company myself. I look for a company that has good management. This management, I invest in the management. Let me give you an example. We all know, for instance, a company like Nestlé, one that makes coffee and these kinds of products. Everyone knows their products, mashallah.
Do you really care who owns it or not?
Do you know who manages it?
He doesn't run it right. I invest in the people who manage it.
Whether it's owned by the Norwegian or Saudi investment fund or whatever the point is, it's a public company. Everyone is just working for profit, but who is actually managing it? So here's where the issue lies, and this brings us to a very important principle. I mentioned in one of my articles, are we suffering from an inflation in the number of capitalist businessmen compared to a decline in entrepreneurial businessmen? And I believe the answer is yes. Yes, we are indeed suffering from this. Why is that? Entrepreneurial businessmen, as I mentioned to you, are like that baker who started small and mastered the craft and knows every detail of it. He grows over time and then goes on to establish companies. He understands the business and passes this knowledge on. Of course, the goal eventually is to hand it over to management. So you'll always find that these pioneers have specialization. Who do you think is more likely to do research and development? The entrepreneur who comes from the profession itself and knows it inside out? Or the one who was simply offered a chance to be a shareholder and own a company, but in reality doesn't have a full understanding of the industry? Of course, I believe that for any economy to grow and create jobs and so on, you need to have the majority of businessmen coming from among the pioneers. So how do you create pioneers? You need to have created jobs, these pioneering individuals. Often employees who work at, say, an oil company and discover that this oil company, for example, is importing a product from abroad. He'll say, I'm going to start a factory, because he worked there and understood the business. This is one of the biggest losses we're experiencing. Many people come to us in the Gulf countries, even without skills, and they end up acquiring those skills here. Unfortunately, we lose them. I mean, I even see that the current direction is good, that now there's foresight in the naturalization policies. You should focus on people who add value to you, people who have spent a large part of their lives here working as doctors and so on. I can attract them to become citizens, and as a result, the money stays with us. And this is something that advanced economies have understood. They notice this. They address the issue. The proportion of immigrants is managed through immigration policies, not based on the volume of business.
For example, you find the European Union or the United States saying, for instance, this year, we're going to bring in 1 million people. And sometimes they'll say, for example, we want to focus on certain specialties, like bringing in IT professionals. So they allow people from countries known for producing a lot of IT talent. But it doesn't reach the point where someone goes and establishes a company just to bring people in. No, those already in the country, both citizens and expatriates, the ones who get employed. So when you consider immigration policies, you have to take into account what resources you already have. You're considering cultural, social, and security balance, all of these factors. So there are regulations that are looked at from a high-level perspective. Whereas if you just leave things open, like someone has a project and needs 2,000 workers, go ahead. All right,
Okay, regarding investment, is it only applicable to large companies? Or can young people, for example, start investing in a grocery store, in gas stations, and so on?
They can, but as I told you, it's not easy. I remember once when I was working at one of the major investment companies in Bahrain, and we had major shareholders. So at that time, I decided, this was a while ago. I mean, we're talking about 2008 or 2009. At that time, I was the CEO of that company. And I noticed that one of the most underdeveloped sectors in Saudi Arabia, honestly, was the gas station sector. When we entered the field, we were shocked. I mean, how? This field turned out to be incredibly difficult to enter in an almost unnatural way. For example, let's talk about gas stations. We hired a consulting company to conduct a full study, and you'd find, for instance, that the landowner is one person. The person who got the license is renting the land from someone else, and that person is the one who actually built the station. No, actually, the one who built the station rents it out to someone else, and then that person rents it out again, for example. It's well known that a certain community is the one that handles the pumps, meaning the gasoline. And there's another community that runs the convenience stores. And yet another community is in charge of the tire shop and the service station. So when we looked at the field, I mean, you really do realize you can... But there are certain regulatory aspects in the market that actually make things much easier for businesses to operate, at least in some respects. However, I want to clarify that this does not mean everything is simple or straightforward. I mean, it's still not easy for you to compete effectively, as I mentioned before, because there are many challenges involved. It's not easy to convince a customer to pay 30 riyals for a product or service, especially when someone else might be able to get the same thing for, say, 15 riyals, maybe even as low as 15 riyals in some cases. This price difference can make it very challenging to attract and retain customers, and it really highlights the difficulties businesses face in such a competitive environment. The service is bad, there is no cleanliness, but I will tell you 15 riyals, I will leave. But when this thing becomes mandatory, for example, like what the government has done recently with gas stations, where there are now specific standards and regulations, then that's it. It's like a hospital. You can't just come and say, well, I'll give up on this to lower the price. So regulation here is important. It really helps a lot in enabling young men and women to participate. When you set regulations and certain requirements, it helps.
You told me a story. A young man was working at a drilling company and they had a problem with the head. The head of this company was Malaysian and he was employed by them.
Yes, that's the one. Look, this is a great example. It really shows you the scale of the problem that I noticed. When I tell you that we look for companies, I mean, at one point I worked at a bank that was owned by a large group of prominent businessmen and companies in the region. And it was also owned by the Singapore Development Bank, which is based in Singapore. It was the first Islamic bank in Asia or in Singapore. So the idea was the same private ownership. We had a Malaysian company come to us, owned by a former engineer at Petronas, which is like the Aramco of Malaysia. And he used to work in the drilling materials sector. Some of these materials are extremely expensive and costly to maintain because even the drill bits are made of diamond, so they can cut through rock. So what did he find?
he found that whenever there was a malfunction in one of these drilling stations, they had to ship the equipment by sea to Norway for repairs.
Subscribe to Al Multaka Podcast on Apple Podcasts and be among the first to hear our latest episodes.
He looked into it carefully and found that about 80% of the work, even in advanced projects, remains technical. You see, the company that manufactures it is in Norway, but 80% of the work is what we call in English fabrication, meaning it's a fabrication workshop. So he told the company, I can do this work myself. What was their response? They told him, we'll support you. And if you really succeed in doing this, we'll give you contracts for 20 years. See how it's a beautiful transformation for someone who started out as an employee. There are actually similar examples, even in Saudi Arabia with Aramco. Aramco does the same thing, and I've given many examples of that. But here, you find this person. First of all, he benefited the company because they used to need to keep a large inventory. Since if this was unavailable, it would be for almost 6 months, so they had to have alternatives. But now, they no longer need to. The second thing is that the cost became much cheaper. So this person came to us wanting us to invest with him, and currently the contracts his company has are worth about $30 million. Do you see how that is? And that's just over 3 years. So here, look at this aspect. You see, it's a cycle, Mr. Khaled. I mean, you just think about it. Any economic activity needs to start. He needs people to come and perform. Okay, the people who carry it out. If they're not from the local population, that means these people will either leave after a while, so you lose that knowledge, or, for example, they don't have enough skills, and you're not developing anything. So how do you develop? How, for example, can we develop our construction sector if Saudis aren't working in that field? No problem, it won't happen.
So we have to offer incentives, as you mentioned, to attract people.
There absolutely has to be, regardless of what you're actually doing. No matter the specific circumstances you may find yourself in your particular situation, as long as you are involved in any sector or profession, the ones who develop are those who start from the profession itself. A lot of people here, for example, in the Gulf countries, started out here and then went on to establish companies abroad and so on. Why? Because they gain knowledge. Knowledge is without a doubt the essential and irreplaceable foundation of any truly successful investment. Unfortunately, here in the Gulf region, we've historically given much more weight and attention to capital. However, knowledge is far more important at this point in time, especially since capital is abundantly available everywhere. The problem is, who brings you the ideas? Who brings you innovation? That's what I've come to understand, and that's the direction we're heading in now. So, capital shouldn't be the main foundation. I mean, for us, even this very thing, it should be taken into consideration even at the level of boards of directors. When it comes to boards of directors, we don't necessarily want just the people who own the most shares. For example, in a company like a telecommunications company, what matters to me is that its board consists of people who have, and now as you know, they're starting to do this. Even now, the Capital Market Authority in Saudi Arabia requires that there be independent board members who have experience in the sector. So knowledge or know-how is much more important than money. Money doesn't guarantee success, but knowledge does. And where does knowledge come from? From practicing the profession, just like that Malaysian gentleman, in fact. So, as you might say, it's truly an interconnected cycle. If you come in and isolate people from one important aspect, there will be a break in the chain, and as a result, things simply won't work.
So for someone who already has the knowledge and is able to turn their job into a business, would you, from your perspective, if you don't mind me asking, advise them to go ahead and actually start their own personal business project?
Honestly, look, there's an important point here in my view. The point is, I've noticed recently that there's a big emphasis on the idea that you have to be a leader and you have to be an entrepreneur. You have to. In reality, I have some reservations about this. I believe that you need to be creative in a specific area. And creativity doesn't necessarily come from passion. I actually disagree with this idea that you should work in something you love. No, if you excel at something and succeed in it, rest assured that you'll develop a great passion for it. But as I mentioned to you, for example, if someone excels in a certain field, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to lead it. For instance, imagine for a moment that you have a highly respected scientist working diligently in the field of biochemistry. Now, this scientist has developed an exceptionally important and truly groundbreaking new therapeutic treatment Does that mean the scientist has to start a company and become its CEO?
No,
No, you want him in research, not president. Does he own the company? Yes. This is the idea of existence. That's why there are investment companies that invest alongside innovators. But I'm not asking him to be a leader. In fact, if many of them became leaders, they would ruin the company. He doesn't know how. He really doesn't know how. He's basically a lab. Person put him in a lab and he'll excel. But if you ask him to manage people, to lead people, he won't be creative. That's the point here. Honestly, truly, this is from the bottom of my heart. A heartfelt and important message I really want to send to our sons and daughters. Don't be too upset. Don't get too discouraged if you don't have a leadership personality or if you're not suited to be, for example, a CEO. This isn't the foundation, nor is it what built the economy. I mean, it's not the CEOs who change the world. Inventors, thinkers, leading leaders. We can always bring in leaders. But who actually drives change? It's people like the outstanding doctor, the skilled engineer, the exceptional teacher. And this is also an important aspect. I mean, when you come to talk about how do we separate ownership from management, this is a point, especially in the sector. I mean, merit should be the standard. It's supposed to be merit, not, for example,
not kinship.
like kinship, for example. I mean, honestly, I really don't care if the owner's son doesn't end up ruining the company. And to be honest, it's wrong anyway. I mean, he may remain as an owner and he might have representation on the board of directors. Yes, so this is very important that whether you're approaching the administrative side of things, the standards are different. Does this person know how to manage or not? But if he's not a manager or a leader, that doesn't mean we just tell him, that's it. You have no future as an owner. No, not at all. Anyone who finds something in themselves or starts in a certain area, be sure that you are capable of achieving your greatest ambitions. And it's not necessary for you to be the one leading this thing. You can achieve this by being you. For example, bringing in investors to invest with you and appoint leaders, and you can be, so to speak, the person who possesses the specialized knowledge in that particular field or specific area of expertise.
All right, Saleh, looking at the economy as it stands right now, if they told you to put your finger on the wound, where specifically would you actually place it in the current market landscape? In your honest opinion, in your view, just to be clear, if you don't mind me asking. In general,
The labor market. The labor market. I find that the biggest challenge, and I keep coming back to this point again and again, is really about how we can possibly do everything that is truly necessary in order to achieve our goals and do it effectively to ensure that our sons and daughters have a genuine, meaningful, and truly fair and equal opportunity to enter all fields. This is very important because unfortunately, in all Gulf countries now, opportunities are not fair. And I assure you, even if things don't reach the same level as they are here, even if the situation reaches just a tenth or even less than what we have here in any country in the world, you'll see. People get upset and say these people are taking over. And this is what we're hearing now in Europe and America. Look at how now all the values of democracy and human rights are forgotten when it comes to making a living. I am sure it is not a matter of blaming the private sector or blaming the expatriates. No. They're all people who came here through proper channels. And the goal was truly to try to provide a decent life. Now we've realized, especially with the population increase, that I just can't do it. There's no system in place. I mean, let's say there isn't a welfare system that can accommodate millions of people. These people need to interact and there needs to be an economy, and the economy is there. The idea is that the economy exists, but you have to activate it in a way that suits you, that suits your sons, that suits your daughters. Give them the opportunity. For example, if someone wants to open a grocery store, they should be able to open a grocery store. And I assure you, we are breaking into many fields here. And I can assure you that it's even harder than breaking into this field in countries that are considered much more advanced than us. Why is that? Because due to our excessive indulgence in this matter, especially in the labor market, with the over-reliance on recruitment and so on, we've created a false sense of prosperity, for example. What do I mean by that? It means the problem has become just about bringing in workers, bring them in, because it's not very costly for you. For example, you see the same Gulf citizen is used to going to say a grocery store, what do you call it? He honks the horn or uses the car horn.
Yeah, the car horn.
Someone comes out, takes his order, and he leaves. Can you do something like that in Switzerland or Britain?
They don't have that at all. It's impossible.
You might even get yourself into trouble because over there they see it as an insult to their dignity. Like, why should I come out for you? They have no tolerance for that. So the idea is that there are many things I could talk about, things I call false luxuries, because we don't rely on ourselves. Everything has become like that, even our sons and daughters. And of course, I'm not just talking about social aspects like having housemaids. And so honestly, the roles of the mother and father have started to disappear. Now it's the driver and the housemaid doing everything. That's really the point. It has many dimensions. And fundamentally, the primary goal is balance, that is, to restore balance to society so that you can make the citizen. We talked about the point of how when a person has the opportunity to develop himself and the chance, for example, to engage in activities, you won't find them, for instance, adopting extremist ideas or turning to violence or crime or anything like that, because it's well known unemployment is the root of all problems.
He doesn't have time. He's busy. He has something to do. He has responsibilities.
He has opportunities. He sees hope, a glimmer of hope. So in my view, the labor market and the job market, and the labor market, especially the imbalance that exists across the Gulf in general, of course, we can say, thank God we've achieved some truly remarkable things. And you'll find, for example, look at the increase in women's employment, for instance. Thank God we've not only achieved the vision, we've even surpassed it. The vision's target was 30%, and now it's at 35%. But then you also have to ask a question. Let's go back to the point about what the social impacts are, for example. And this is a question I've asked myself. Where is women's employment heading? It's great, thank God. We can now say that we have a significant feminization of many jobs. But let's consider that in our society, the prevailing view is still that the man is the breadwinner. So how much does it affect things if the woman doesn't work? Or if the man doesn't work? This is a question we need to ask ourselves, right or not? I mean, a man who doesn't work, in my view, the social consequences of that are much more serious.
Worse than...
We used to have a situation. We had a situation that, thank God, has now been corrected. But to what extent do we want, for example, and to what extent are our institutions, and to what extent are we asking the government for jobs? The government is not obligated to provide jobs. The government could come tomorrow and say, no one gets deductions, that's it. But the government cares about the economy and doesn't want that to happen. It's something you do. Now, the question is, first of all, we as citizens, not just as business people, need to have awareness that one of the most important assets we have in our economy is the labor market. This labor market, if I don't see it as a necessity for myself, I have to think about my son and my grandson. It's what will provide for them. It is like the arteries that carry blood and nourishment to all parts of the body. So if this isn't providing opportunities, I think we can truly say that we have achieved our ambition as a nation. When you begin to see Saudi construction workers on building sites, and when you start to notice Saudi plumbers and mechanics actively working in their trades, this visible participation in these important professions will be a clear sign of our progress. Take, for example, the government's initiative with technical colleges show. Many people do you know who graduated from technical colleges, or their children, or those who tried to work but couldn't. Many of them went and opened a workshop in the industrial area, but then closed it. Why? Because the opportunity isn't fair. They couldn't compete. Like I mentioned to you, if you put all these same conditions in a country like, say, South Korea or Germany, I assure you, you would absolutely see a complete withdrawal of citizens there as well. People simply wouldn't be able to manage or handle or cope with a difficult situation. In such circumstances, it would just be too much for them.
The same thing would apply as what's happening here.
This is exactly what's happening even in America now. Take, for example, the Mexican immigrants who come Americans are worried, or at least some are worried about this issue. Because even though they have an advantage there, like I told you, they address the issue at the immigration level. They either grant them citizenship or residency and they pay taxes, so the government benefits. But here, what are they doing? They're just using the infrastructure. Those who pay taxes transfer money outside the country, while those who transfer money there want to settle. They want to live there, so they stay. So look at how they handle the situation. But here, our approach is different. Our approach is that they come don't pay taxes. They use the country's infrastructure and resource such as our roads, public services, and utilities benefiting from what we have built. And they live among us as part of our communities, sharing our neighborhoods and daily lives. In the end, however, they keep sending a significant portion of their earnings abroad to other countries, which can have a real impact on our local economy, and ultimately, they might even take legal action against you, which could lead to complicated and costly lawsuits. As I said before, I personally think it's wise if we really need to make a decision in this situation to proceed with great caution and careful consideration, to localize and settle these people. Here's where the important question really comes up. When you talk about localization, you always say, no, localization is a definite red line, right? Okay, so then why are they even here in this particular way in the first place? Can you maybe explain that a bit more? That means did we go overboard? Did we deprive our sons and daughters, you and I included? Even our generation, didn't have many job opportunities. Let me tell you, in most countries around the world, a lot of people leave school at the middle school level or even elementary school, and they start to find other sources of income and many alternatives, meaning working in manual or vocational jobs socially. For Saudis and Gulf nationals, that's just not possible. And honestly, that's a sad thing. Because if someone, for example, doesn't have the means to go to university, maybe he has certain limitations. But if you take him, for instance, as a craftsman, someone skilled with his hands, could he work?
No, we're almost finished. But while you were talking, you mentioned something to me about in Germany and in Japan, that they're not at a high level of education.
Yes, honestly, I was surprised by this. I had taken my father for treatment. May God forgive him. And there was an Arab friend with us who was living in Germany. I was really impressed by the Germans, and I had this image that all Germans must surely be at the highest levels of education. So I mentioned to him, like, how so? I gave him my positive opinion to him, but he said no. But I mean, don't you notice that they're, in a way, kind of simple? I asked, what do you mean by simple? Germany is an advanced country. He said, no, most of them are usually filtered out from early stages. He even said the filtering begins as early as primary school and middle school. Some of them start heading towards vocational fields. So it became clear to me that most of the German people, it's rare for someone among them to have a university degree, but over there, a plumber lives a good life. I mean, a tradesman like a plumber or a mechanic lives an excellent life. Because, as he says, the idea is, in a factory, I need 0 workers and 10 engineers. Unfortunately, in Arab countries, the pyramid is inverted. Here, if you don't have a university degree, you don't have a chance to work.
Now, he stops at the middle school level because he didn't pass the exams required to go to university.
For example, his level in mathematics might be weak. So people say it's a shame to send him into a vocational field. First of all, if I force him to go to university, that means the standards of my universities have to drop. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's happening here. He tells you. They say, for example, I sought them some people, for instance, are good at certain things. Some are good at manual work. Others, for example, are good at literary work. So they don't direct everyone by saying, you all have to go to university to get a job. They try as much as possible. Because as we mentioned, 70 to 80% of jobs are in small and medium enterprises. And most of these jobs are in vocational fields.
What you need?
What you need. And these are the jobs that provide employment opportunities. I mean, if you look at the Gulf job market now, you'll notice that certainly 70 to 80%, of course, we don't really see them because expatriate workers are the ones filling those positions for us. But these are the jobs.
So how? How do we organize this? How do the Germans do it? How do we organize working in plumbing, carpentry, and similar trades?
Look, that's your question. Your question should actually be, why don't we respect these jobs? At first, as I told you, it was my father and our neighbors. I remember, for example, we had a neighbor who worked at Aramco, the neighbor's job. So I remember when we wanted something done, my father spoke to him and he came and made us a wardrobe, and he made it in the best possible way to the highest standards. These trades are the foundation of the economy. You see, when it comes to heavy industries like cars and steel, as I mentioned before, you only need a limited number of engineers, but you need people. For example, even here, the level of craftsmanship in these trades is actually weak. For example, if you go now to a construction worker, I'm not even talking about Germany. Just look at construction workers in some of the neighboring Arab countries like Jordan or Syria. In Egypt, you'll find that they're often much more skilled
than the construction workers we have here. Because the construction workers we have here are usually poor guys brought in from some East Asian country who used to be farmers or fishermen, and they brought them here. So you end up with things that are just laughable. Sometimes when it comes to construction, you see things falling apart because they just don't know how to do it. But I mean, even many of the expat brothers have told me, they say, you guys are just leaving. This reminds me of that proverb I told you about, the story. That famous line Adel Imam said, you left the whole apartment and you're all sitting in one room, just one room. Our economy is there. And I remember Prince Sultan bin Salman was once asked about this, and he said, no, we are here, we exist. The question is, why? Because, I mean, the jobs are available. The question is, how do we as Saudis get these jobs out of it? So your question, when you say the German profession, this profession has been, so to speak, shaped to fit their culture and their circumstances. So as a result, nothing changes or happens unless a country experiences a shock, like the oil boom shock. They have a problem, I mean. For example, a German plumber can tell you, I make 40 reals a month, and you can't say he's wrong, he's working and doing well. For example, I can tell you, I'm certain that here in Saudi Arabia, you might have a plumber who makes 40, 50, or even 60,000 reals.
I don't get involved in that. That's true, but what's the issue?
The way the work is done isn't suitable. So that's the bigger obstacle. That's why I was telling you, I wish there would be an adoption of entities that want to see that. For example, the profession would be practiced in the same way as, say, Aramco did it. They would give them uniforms and a manual. How is safety handled? What are the things involved? What are the procedures? What are your rights as an employee? There are designated times. You have vacations. You gave them a fair opportunity to practice the profession and respected them in a way that suits their community. I can't go to the poorest countries in the world and see how jobs are done there and then come back.
Copy it.
Here, copying them here is not acceptable. It's not acceptable, not in any country. As I told you, if you do this in any country in the world, I assure you the same thing that happened here will happen there.
Honestly, that's true, because it takes away from the issue for me, because this is it. This is the one who works.
You end up depriving the people of the country from entering these fields because they simply can't compete.
Okay, if you could go back in time to the beginning, back in high school, would you follow the same path you took? Or would you say, no, honestly, I'll try to go into investment and start from there right away?
Honestly, look, thank God no matter what. I mean, the investment field, I really benefited a lot from it in every aspect. And I mean, there was a stage where I wished I had studied, for example, more sociology and things like that. But in practice, what I learned later on, I put to work. Now, I can say, God willing, there is an opportunity now, right now, where policies are being set with a perspective that takes these aspects into account. But can I say that we have done enough? No, honestly, I strongly call for the establishment of research centers. Look, our Saudi experience is very, very unique. It's an experience the whole world is watching. We've been through a lot of things, and it's truly remarkable. When you see Saudis entering a field, God willing, with determination and dedication, they truly excel and stand out, whether it's in medicine or any other area. So this didn't just happen out of nowhere. But have we documented this? Have we really understood it? Let's take the example of the Aramco experience. Aramco is, in my view, a national epic in terms of how it came into our communities, how it managed to bring together people from different ethnicities, sects, and backgrounds. They all came, worked, and lived together. And during this period, we went through many crises, wars. We went through intellectual ideologies as well. You know, there's no need to mention Nasserism, nationalism, and the era of extremism, all of these things as they were. These were all challenges for the Saudi people. But at the same time, there were also factors that shaped us.
We must build on them for the next stage. How do we build on them? First, we need to understand. It really bothers me when someone comes and says Saudis are lazy. No, we are not lazy. You are not lazy. And the proof is, look, for example, at someone working in real estate, even if he just has a small real estate office, see how hard he works digging into the ground, because this is a field he knows he can work in. So it's unfair for us to come and label everyone as lazy or anything like that. So the investment side, you could say, helped me create a balance, because a person can live a decent life in the absence of these things. But at the same time, it gave me this perspective because I have an interest in it. But now, for example, I really do wish that I could just specialize even more deeply in the field and so on. But simply reading and staying informed about the latest developments might, God willing, be enough for me, at least for the time being.
May God grant you health and wellness and a long life. Thank you. May God make you happy. Spending time with you is more than wonderful.
Thank you for your valuable information.
Wonderful.
I hope, as they say, I was indeed light-hearted.
God bless you. Thank you.
The topics are heavy, but hopefully you can handle them.
Look, may God bless you, viewers.
The podcast, thank you. Thank you very much, Asad Khalid. May God protect you, wonderful. God bless you. May God grant you wellness and bless your hands.
We worked hard.
No, not at all. On the contrary.